Glad you could join us this evening. I'm Hugh Hefner, editor-publisher of Playboy magazine, and your host. And this is Playboy's Penthouse. Come on in and meet some of our guests. Well, here we have Eleanor Bradley.
Welcome back to The Weekend. I'm Ed Kalegi. Normally, when we welcome an author to the show, he or she is talking about their one new book. Our next guest has two new books. We're talking volume promotion here, kind of like Lucy and Ethel working on the old conveyor belt. The new books, Playboy Laughs, the comedy, comedians, and cartoons of Playboy, and Starring the Plaza, Hollywood, Broadway, and high society visit the world's favorite hotel. It's great to say hello to Patty Farmer. Patty, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ed. How are you?
I am terrific. It is great to have you on. Let's first delve into Playboy Laughs. Now, people think Playboy, many people immediately think belly buttons, creases, and staples, but the magazine opened the door for a much deeper conversation of sophistication in this country. Isn't that true?
Absolutely, and big impact on cultural change, definitely.
Yes, sure did. When Playboy started back in the 1950s, media was much different. It was inherently filtered. Back then, the Saturday Evening Post, which was one of the big magazines at the time, that kind of had as much pizzazz as a cup of vanilla ice cream. When Playboy came, it really changed everything. It was groundbreaking on so many different ways. How was the editorial content of Playboy first received?
Right from the beginning, from that first issue in 1954, it was well received. Hef had the inane ability to hire the very best people. So with the magazine, he had the best editors. Spektorsky managed it from New York and brought with him a lot of really, really great writers, and there were a lot of great authors who wrote for the magazine. And then also the content, the show light on entertainment as well as cartoons.
It was a way to kind of bring certain ideas, topics, and conversations into the mainstream that were really never there before. And as you mentioned, the essays and also the cartoons. And if I read somewhere that Hef actually wanted to start off his career, he wanted to be a cartoonist. The idea of just being a magazine publisher wasn't the main thing driving him. He wanted to be a cartoonist more than anything else.
That's right, Ed, and I hope you read it in my book.
Yes.
But definitely, Hef, ever since he was a little boy, envisioned himself making a living as a cartoonist, and that was the way he actually journaled. He would draw these cartoons depicting different stages of his life, and then when he got older, graduated college, he started submitting around Chicago without any success. And in 1951, actually published a full 74-page comic book. And it was good. I have a copy myself. I've read it. It was good. It just wasn't good enough to compete with the other greats of that time. So he turned his attention towards starting an empire.
Now, when you look at the content of the magazine and how it evolved, it became important in terms of the platform it gave certain people. There are people that when you think back now are iconic when it comes to commentary and their editorial content. And Playboy was really their first opportunity to be noticed on a national scale.
Mm-hmm.
And that created that, and that was not there before. And then the magazine sort of evolves. We go into the 1960s, and Hugh Hefner takes it to television. There were television shows, most notably Playboy Penthouse, Playboy After Dark. It really brought the feeling of the magazine to television. There was a sophistication to it. It was, you were going to a party on television, and it was amazing how he was able to kind of transform the feeling of the magazine and take it to the the hard constraints of television.
Right again. I call Playboy's Penthouse the first reality TV show, because when the networks approached Hef, I'm sure they had the idea of him having an Ed Sullivan type show where the guests would come out, sing a song or tell a joke, and maybe sit and talk on the couch for a while. But Hef wanted people to feel that they were in his home, in his penthouse, and he was just having this wonderful mix of people, and maybe Tony Bennett, one of his great pals would get up and sing, or Sammy Davis, or Rich Little, or any of the great cartoonists. So it was groundbreaking.
And it was because, we mentioned how, it was early reality television. Television then was so heavily scripted and choreographed. You think about the traditional variety shows of that time. And when you would watch these shows, it was simply, we've got a camera and we're following folks around. And, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and we're going to fill the 30, 60 minutes, whatever. And you mentioned Sammy Davis. Hugh Hefner gave a platform to people of color in a way that other networks and producers were not doing at that time. So from even that point of reference when it comes to our societal evolution in the 1960s, Hugh Hefner was very far ahead of the game.
Definitely, but he paid a heavy price. He had people like Sammy Davis and like Nat King Cole.
Yeah.
And the night he had Nat King Cole, the next morning, the world was upside down. Networks and sponsors threatened to pull the show and pull advertising because of just the fact that Nat King Cole sat down and talked to a white woman. We were still operating pre-Civil Rights Act of 1964 there.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing to think how far we've come since then. I mean, just for having a conversation on television, two people of different races, how it would cause such a kerfluffle, so to speak, the next morning. They talk about the good old days. Not too good when you think back to things like that. How difficult was it for Hugh Hefner to kind of persevere through a time like that where, okay, we know there was nudity in the magazine, but it wasn't just all about the nudity. We know that as well. There were magazines that came along later on that had much more nudity than was ever seen in Playboy. Playboy had more of a impact on the conversation in this country and sort of a political conversation, an intellectual conversation than any of those other types of magazines had. He was able to maintain that in the brand from the 70s into the 80s and beyond. How difficult was it for him to maintain that?
He always had blowback. When the magazine advocated for women's rights, and many people don't know that he ever advocated. He gets a bad rep from the women's movement, but he was the first magazine that wrote that women should have control of their own bodies and pushed for this new thing coming out called the pill. And he wrote about the Vietnam War, and these things are commonplace now, but to have that addressed in a major national, international magazine was groundbreaking back then. Playboy
and Hefner himself have embraced your work. Tell me about the relationship that you've created with Playboy over the years.
Well, it took a while. It took almost a year for them to take me serious, because I later found out they said, you have to understand that we get 100 requests a day from people saying they're writing an article or they're writing a book. And, we have to vet everybody. And once they found out I was serious and I was a legitimate writer and archivist and historian, they warmed up, and they couldn't have been more gracious. Hugh Hefner had his personal archivist contact me and open his personal archives to me. Mm-hmm. So that was an important day for me when I received that call. And they couldn't have been nicer. And Hugh Hefner, of course, was the main library.
I would imagine so. I mean, talk about it. I mean, just volumes and volumes of experiences going all the way back to when he actually started the magazine at a card table in his apartment in Chicago, well, back in the early 1950s. Let's touch as well on the other book you have out right now, Starring the Plaza, Hollywood, Broadway, and High Society Visit the World's Favorite Hotel. Tell me a little about the book.
First, Ed, I have to tell you and your listeners that I did not plan it this way.
Uh-oh.
It just happened that they're both coming out at the same time.
But that's a good thing, right? Yes.
I don't want anyone to think I'm really losing my marbles. But, yes, the Plaza Hotel in New York, it just piqued my interest. It's 110 years old this year, and so much went on there. So many movies were made, and that just, fed into what I do, which is typically talk to the entertainers. But I went through the movie archives and found movies like Alfred Hitchcock, North by Northwest, all the way up to Spielberg, making movies and TV shows, everything from the Gossip Girls to the Sopranos. They used that as a backdrop. And I think I say in the book that all you have to do is see a picture of the Plaza Hotel and you instantly know what city you're in.
Exactly, and everyone knows what hotel it is when they see that picture as well, right off the bat. It is the perfect way to round out your summer reading list, both Playboy Laughs, the comedy, comedians, and cartoons of Playboy, and starring the Plaza, Hollywood, Broadway, and high society. Visit the world's favorite hotel. You can check out Patty's website at patty-farmer.com. Patty Farmer, thank you so much for joining us here on The Weekend.
Ed, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Stay with us. More to come. I'm Ed Kalegi, and this is The Weekend.